Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And that brings us to a discussion of one of the films contained within this marvelous set, which was released by Criterion earlier this year, which is called Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project Number 4. And one of the films that is included in this wonderful set is designated at spy number 1143. This is a work which is described as being from the year 1972. And the name of the filmmaker is Sarah Maldoror. And the name of the work is Sambi Zanga. And it is from the director filmmaker Sarah Maldoror, and among its incredible cast we have Domingos de Oliveira as Domingos Xavier and Elisa Andrade as Maria. And this work is also, we have the adaptation, screenplay, and dialogue credited to Maurice Ponce and Mario de Andrade. And this is based upon the novel A Vida Verdadera de Domingos Xavier by Jose Luandino Vieira. And of course, this is the work which is Sambi Zanga. And my goodness, what a powerful, direct, and very multi-dimensional, multifaceted work that forms a type of tapestry in the context, the socio-political and historical context of Angola, leading up to a very critical point in the context of the history of Angola, that critical point being referenced as February 1961. So this film, Sambi Zanga, it purports itself to be taking place leading up to this very key critical moment in the history of Angola society and politics, because of its significance in the context of a revolutionary war of independence vis-a-vis the colonial presence of the Portuguese in Angola. So a very powerful and quite metaphorical, but also quite direct, very subtle, but also, and very nuanced, but also very striking, and very sudden, and very swift, with its a cinematic sweep, and also a sense of purpose and a political drive that also keeps in mind, or that also has a very strong grip on the sensibilities of the cinematic, and also the effect and meaning and presence of sound and image and design and performance and acting, as well as the subtleties of the portrayal of a sort of political revolutionary force or dynamic that is at work, that is mirroring, of course, a very important part of the sweep of the history of Angola. Again, set forth against the backdrop or within the context, both directly and in metaphorical terms, contained within this great work, which is Sambi Zanga, from the filmmaker Sarah Maldoror. So I've mentioned, of course, here the context of this film within the focus of the history of Angola. And we have a broad sweep, therefore, a broad sort of historical sweep or guiding context. But at the same time, and this is one of the great strengths of this work, which is it also at the same time, or it uses as the focal point of such discussion of the sweep of cultural, socio-political forces or change, it has at the focal point of such discussion the story of a family unit, a couple, a young couple and a young family within the backdrop of a warm and collective and a very supporting, mutually supporting community. And this is the couple that is, one can say, is our main protagonists or our primary characters. This is this is the Domingos Xavier character and Maria character, and we have their bond, which is very, I think, universal, very much accessible, even for myself. I've never been to Angola, but I can feel like I understand, or I can connect with their story as it's revealed to us very early on, because they are it's a warm family life that is filled with very open and very warm emotional human bonds, familial bonds, and bonds of dedication and love. And this is very important because it is set, of course, within the context of this intimate relationship. It's also set within the context of how important this type of family unit is against the foundation or along the foundation of the community. And community and the individual and the familial unit, the family unit, is very important because these are all under threat within the means of the cinematic expression Sambizanga, because of the sort of authoritarian presence as exemplified in the various episodes we see here of the colonial presence, the colonial presence of the Portuguese forces. And so we have a very tight grip and quite a frightening grip. And such frightening grip has very immediate ramifications for our primary characters, in particular Domingos Xavier. And we understand that he is under threat because of being essentially arrested and taken into custody by the forces here. And so herein lies the crux or the critical dilemma of this film, namely the breakdown or the destruction or the potential threat to this family unit because of the authoritarian rule, or because of the threat of type of the sudden say actions of the authoritarian presence as personified or as exemplified through the colonial presence of the Portuguese as presented through this film. And then how that affects not only Domingos Xavier, not only how it affects his family, but also how it affects Maria and her struggle and her attempt at trying to find a sense of truth or justice through a myriad form of, say, bureaucratic obstacles, shall we say. And also not just her struggle and not just his struggle, but also the struggles of the community, because we understand too that their story is an individual one, but also their story is emblematic of a whole series of stories that are inflicted upon this community by the authoritarian presence. And so we have thus the story widening, and as Sambizanga's story unfurls and unfolds, and we follow Maria's attempts at trying to get some kind of sense of justice, and we understand too that this struggle is also widespread because we see details of, say, other members of the community, intergenerational, both young and old, trying in their own maybe silent or maybe not so silent ways to form a sense of resistance and maybe provide a foundation for what will ultimately be the spirit of revolution leading into the very key critical period of February 1961. We're not quite there yet in the context of the goings-on of this film, Sambizanga, but we are approaching. And I think an understanding of history, or by virtue of an understanding of history, which Sarah Maldoror and the other filmmakers obviously carry with them as and the spirit is there within the film. This is very evident, and we see the sort of seeds of a type of revolt, and also the seeds of or the widespread nature of the seeds of such revolt, and the reasons behind that, and how this is both emotional as well as societal and political. And it's also historical, but it's also very intimate and personal. And it's a story that affects people on a very deep and a very honest and shocking level. And it's that level of honesty and shock that one can say is maybe expressed in these cinematic terms in the hands of Sara Maldoror and others, to form a type of cinematic expression for the spirit of revolutionary independence that will, of course, find a very active voice, shall we say, within the context of the politics and history of Angola in February 1961 and beyond. So we have thus a cinematic expression that is very robust, very striking. I should say, too, that the way in which this story unfolds, it's not always direct. There are ways in which, say, political violence is shown maybe in an indirect, maybe metaphorical manner. And so it's not always relying upon, say, shocking images of political violence, but the implication of political violence by means of cinematic style. And so this is one of the great strengths and one of the great hallmarks, one can say, of the artistry of Sara Maldoror, which is mentioned in a number of places with the supplements, including, for example, the essay, which is included with the booklet for the set by Yasmina Price. So we'll talk about that momentarily. So there's this way in which this film deals with or implies or suggests through cinematic metaphor the horrors of sort of oppression pre-1961 during this colonial period. And so this is going towards the great strength of Maldoror's cinema, as well as showing a widespread nature of the sort of focal points, the foci, if you will, of the revolutionary spirit and atmosphere, the laying of the foundations of such. We have not just the struggles of Domingos Xavier and the other figures in similar situation within the community, these young men and their families and their place within the community, but also the community elders and also the young children of the community and also the women of the community as well, as expressed or exemplified by the story of Maria and her struggle as well. And so we have a widespread, a multi-generational and multifaceted community approach to this notion of revolution, or the laying down the foundations for what will end up becoming the revolutionary spirit of 1961. And we have therefore the expression of an intimate story that is made manifest through the context of many different facets of this community. So this is very important. And speaking of community too, we should recall the supplements in the essay do indicate, for example, the significance of the title Sambizanga, and Sambizanga being it's described as a suburb, a working class suburb of the capital of Angola. And so we have the idea that this film seems to be capital of Angola, which is Luanda, and we have therefore this the notion of the film maybe standing in or maybe serving as a cinematic expression or symbol of its sort of these iterations or this manifestations or other cinematic expressions of the spiritual or political revolutionary spirit of February 1961. Again, the title, I think, speaks volumes in that regard. But also we have to recall, too, various aspects of the background of each of the filmmakers. I mentioned Maurice Ponce and Mario de Andrade, as well as Sara Maldoror herself, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get to the supplements and essay, because there's also a very strong link to the politics of the time and how the politics of the time, as linked to these figures that are part of the cast and crew, are also linked to very directly to the movement and sweep of the politics and history of Angola connection, one of the connections of which being with the popular movement for the liberation of Angola, or the MPLA. And so we have that embedded within, say, the political structure or the political drive or the message, as it were, of Sambizanga, or what it represents in terms of cinema standing in for something else. That something else being the political, cultural, and historical aspect of the story being told by Sara Maldoror and others here through this film Sambizanga. So there's a lot going on here, and I think also one can say too that the performances are really very riveting and very accessible and they are our way into this world. As I mentioned, I am not I'm not an expert when it comes to the history or politics of Angola. I've never been to this part of the world. And yet, through the nuance of the performances, Elisa Andrade, for example, one can feel her struggle. One can feel her pain as a wife, as a mother, as a member of the community, as someone who is struggling, as someone who is being confronted by these really terrible odds, as it were. And also Domingos Xavier and the people around him as well, and his struggle in terms of the confusion of injustice and also the cruelty of injustice, and how this is a very universal theme and thus a very accessible theme, and one that I think a viewer in 2022 can still connect with and find resonances with to this very day. So as well as being a type of historical document that has a great deal of significance when one watches this film, even in the course of 2022. So there's so much here, and it is very multifaceted and multi-layered, and it is a wonderful example of the cinema of Sara Maldoror, and it's a great start to this great set, which is the World Cinema Project. So this is the film from 1972 from the filmmaker Sara Maldoror, and it is this work which is Sambi Zanga. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Sambi Zanga, as part of its World Cinema Project number 4 set, or Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project number 4 set. Once again, the work Sambi Zanga, in the context of the Criterion Collection physical media catalog, is given the spine number 1143. And just a word about the restoration that is the basis of this presentation. According to the materials here, this is purported to be based on a 4K restoration undertaken by the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project. And looking at the booklet itself, starting on page 66, there's a description about this restoration for Sambi Zanga. And it states, Sambi Zanga is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. This digital transfer was created in 4K resolution. It's from the 35mm original camera negative. So what we have here is a restoration, which is yet another example of the very important work that this World Cinema Project represents. And so it's wonderful to see this film presented in this way. So I am not in any way an expert when it comes to this film, including the details surrounding its release. So I don't have a frame of reference, unfortunately, to compare. But as a viewer of this work through the context of this release, I'm very impressed with this. And it feels it was a presentation, and the sound was something that was really engaging for me. And I was very riveted by it. And so it was a very effective overall presentation from my vantage point. And so that's a quick word about the restoration of Sambi Zanga. But now we should also point out that each of these films in the World Cinema Project set has accompanied with it a number of supplements and also an essay that is in this booklet. So first, let us go to the supplement section that accompanies this work, Sambi Zanga. So what we have here is, we have a number of things. First, we have an introduction, and this is an introduction from Martin Scorsese. This is described as being from the year 2022. It's approximately 3 minutes. Now, Martin Scorsese will provide introductions to each of these films in the World Cinema Project set. So here is one such example, or the first example, one of many, which is his introduction or introductory comments to Sambi Zanga. They are expressed in a way that one can say, watch the introduction before watching the film Sambi Zanga itself. And so one can do that, or of course one can watch the introduction after seeing the film Sambi Zanga to provide even more context. He does talk about Sara Maldoror in a little bit of background detail, and also Mario de Andrade, and also the professional and personal relationship between Mario de Andrade and Sara Maldoror, and also their connections to the political and social cultural and historical sweep of the details and the context upon which this film Sambizanga is based. So very fascinating and very helpful and worthwhile introductory comments from the great Martin Scorsese about Sarah Maldoror and her work as a filmmaker. Guns for Banta is mentioned a little bit, which will also be mentioned a little bit later in the other supplement and also in the essay. And so we also get a little bit of the context of Sarah Maldoror as a filmmaker herself, which is also really wonderful. It's great to get this highlight of her work and her legacy, and we'll get more of a we will get more discussion about Sarah Maldoror's work in the context of her own life and legacy when we get to the second supplement here. But it's wonderful to have these introductory comments from Martin Scorsese here. So once again, this is the introduction from Scorsese, and this is approximately 3 minutes. This is well, this is not all, because next we get another supplement accompanying this work, Sambizanga, and this is a documentary, or not a documentary, but it is a supplement which has interviews with Anushka de Andrade, who is the daughter of Sarah Maldoror, and this is from 2022. And also it has incorporated within it footage or excerpts from interviews conducted in 2008 with Sarah Maldoror herself. So it's wonderful to get a combination of these interviews, mother and daughter, as it were. And also a great context, because a lot of the maybe the celebration of the wonder and the brilliance of Sarah Maldoror's work has to do with the way in which there are a lot of connections vis-a-vis her familial connections as well. Mario de Andrade is mentioned, of course, her life partner, and so this is very important context, and it's great to hear Anushka de Andrade's comments here. They're really wonderful because she speaks, for instance, about a description of Sarah Maldoror as being a filmmaker who's so strong and would not compromise her artistic integrity. And that is exemplified in a film like Sambizanga, very much so. Very strong message, very strong presence, and very direct and very almost brutally honest in a lot of places. And also there's a discussion too with regard to the film school education of Sarah Maldoror and her education in the Soviet Union, in Moscow, and her desire to want to learn about say filmmaking technique, montage. Eisenstein is mentioned here. So here we have that connection in terms of her drive as a filmmaker and artist. At the same time, there is a discussion about political affiliations and also personal connections. I mentioned MPLA and also the connection between or with the MPLA with Mario de Andrade and also Maurice Ponce as well. And so this, of course, forms a very important backdrop or foundation with regard to the story structure setup. The writing and the genesis of the story that becomes Sambizanga. So very important indeed. Also, there are some other features, or there are other works by Maldoror that are mentioned. For example, Guns for Banta, which from 1970, which was mentioned briefly by Scorsese in his introduction, of course. And there is a political implication within that film, but also there is a story behind it in terms of its sort of political suppression. So that is an example of maybe some of the struggles or difficulties that Sarah Maldoror had to face during the context of her filmmaking career. But she also speaks to, or Anushka de Andrade also speaks about an earlier work from 1968, Mon Agamben, Le Complet. And so we have this idea too of a story, again, as described in the supplement, really wonderfully described, about another story of the interaction between the Angolan population on the one hand, and also the colonial presence of the Portuguese on the other, and how oftentimes there is this idea of misunderstanding or miscommunication in the context of this phrase, le complet, but how that seemingly simple misunderstanding can have drastic ramifications that are quite drastic and quite significant indeed, and it can lead into political overthrow. And so this is it's described here again as an example of Maldoror's filmography, but also I think it provides further context into, say, a possible reading into a work like Sambizanga, which one can say has very similar themes and very similar concerns, at least how we hear it described by Maldoror and by de Andrade here. So we have then a discussion perhaps into Sambizanga itself, and we have, for example, the discussion of we mentioned Monangambe, and then also A Vida Verdadera de Domingos Xavier, so Jose Luandino Vieira, and the significance of this in the context of the work of Maldoror, and then also this idea of the political prisoner and the context of the plight or the torture and the duress of the political prisoner, and how this is maybe one of the primary focal points of the sort of the engendering of the revolutionary spirit that leads to a real breaking point. And that breaking point is exemplified in history, February 1961. Very important aspect indeed. And then there's further discussion about the making of this film Sambizanga and the actual context of making this film. It was described as being shot. The film was shot in the Congo. It was made in the Congo, taking into consideration certain actual political realities of the time of the making of the film, and also the mentioning of non-professional actors being involved here, and also there are connections to MPLA, for example. Elisa Andrade, who plays one of the main characters of this film, is described as being personally associated with described as being a militant figure from the MPLA. So there is this kind of connection that is also very much deeply rooted in the political context of the time, or the political context of the story and the times in which the story takes place, so leading up to 1961. And also there is an interesting discussion about some criticisms that were made against Sambizanga at the time. The idea too about, or criticisms, or maybe the ways in which this film was seen as being somewhat going against expectation. I think Sarah Maldoror here, for instance, talks about how there is the use of quote-unquote photogenic actors, good-looking actors, as it were, that were portraying many of these characters on screen, and this idea of in her words, going against type or going against expectations. But this also, I think, lends itself very nicely to the idea too that this is also in many ways a constructed story. This is a constructed story. It is not a documentary in that way, but it's a constructed story. But it has its basis in elements and realities of the time period in which it's telling its story. So this is a very interesting overlap or mix or blend of, say, quote unquote, truth and fiction. And I think that's an example of how so brilliantly Sarah Maldoror really has a handle on the medium of cinema and the power of cinema and the scope of such power of cinema, especially in her hands. So, and also there's a very interesting discussion about the languages that are employed here, that are shown here in this work. Portuguese and Kimbundu and Lingala and others. And Sarah Maldoror is described here by de Andrade here. She says that how Sarah Maldoror could speak only French, only the French language, but at the same time, this idea of the preservation of language is so important for her, and how the overlap of languages or differing languages is also itself a type of statement. And this was something that she wanted to preserve so much in terms of her own filmmaking. So a very interesting aspect in terms of Sarah Maldoror's own, maybe a detail of her own biography, as well as the context in which that detail of her biography really has some resonance vis-a-vis the way that language is used in this work, Sambizanga. And also there's mention too of a type of solidarity, a community solidarity periphery that is very much part of the revolutionary spirit that is expressed in many aspects of this film, Sambizanga, and many characters that we meet, both in the central focus of the action and also in the periphery. And so this is very important stuff indeed. There's also further discussion of specific scenes here. It's a really wonderful overall discussion with Agnieszka de Andrade, and also the excerpts from the interview, from earlier with Sarah Maldoror. So wonderful job. This is really great. The poetry and passion of Sarah Maldoror. This supplement is incredible. It's a learning experience for me. I learned so much. I watched it a number of times, trying to take down as many notes as possible with regard to the details. Everything had its significance, and I learned so much. Again, I'm watching this film from the context of someone who is not at all an expert. So, and coming at this from that perspective really made a supplement like this very insightful and wonderful for me. So thank you to Criterion for being able to include this. So this is approximately 25 minutes. And so that concludes the supplements that can be found with the disc in the supplement section of the disc. It's tied with or associated with the film Sambizanga. But also we should mention that the booklet has an essay starting on page 12 of such booklet. This is by Yasmina Price. It's called Everyday Revolution, and it is a great it has a great length to it. It covers so many of the points of the significance of the filmmaking craft of Sarah Maldoror, and also how that craft and those significant points are at play with such strength and such vigor in the film Sambizanga. You know, the idea of community and various aspects of the community that make up the whole, the spiritual revolutionary whole, and how this is crossing boundaries of gender. This is also crossing boundaries of generations. And this is also crossing boundaries of both the intimate and personal and emotional, and then also the broad sweep of politics and history on the other hand. So many boundaries being crossed all at once. And it's made with a great, really well-written and well-expressed essay here by Yasmina Price. Also, there are the details about Sarah Maldoror and her life and times and career in the context of some of the films that we've mentioned before here, and of course Sambizanga, and some of the key connections, say with MPLA and Sarah Maldoror, her life partner Mario de Andrade, Ponce, and we mentioned too earlier Elisa Andrade and other people as well. So and also the significance of 1961 cannot be emphasized enough, and this is again the key point, one of the key points here. And so an understanding of this seems to be very important. And so reading an essay like this one by by Yasmina Price called Everyday Revolution is a great reminder of this, as well as the other supplements that accompany this work, Sambizanga. So all in all, a wonderful and very thought-provoking and quite powerful work that is part of this great set, the World Cinema Project #4. This is the work from 1972, and the filmmaker Sarah Maldoror, and it is this work which is Sambizanga. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. So let us continue on with further discussions of each of the films that can be found in this wonderful set, Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project #4. So the next video in this discussion series will be on the next film here, Prisoners de Terre. So I hope to see you at that next video, my dear friends. But in the meantime, I very much hope that this video finds you happy and healthy and well. And I hope that you continue to watch a lot of great movies. So until the next video, my dear friends, thank you and cheers.